Here are some wrap-up thoughts on how you should be using these exercises to enhance your practicing. With all of the variations that we've tried, for instance in Row, Row, Row Your Boat, where we're throwing the hooked bow pattern against the scale and we're changing the harmonic progression, the rhythm of how quickly we move through the scale notes against the same bowing. Don't feel like you have to do all of these exercises at once, especially as you're first trying them out. In fact, I encourage you to take one practice session, to work on each of the progressions of the exercise. So, to give you an example of how you could structure your practice sessions throughout the week, for your first practice session of the week, spend your time on the first version of playing this hooked bow rhythm against the scale, where we're doing it at the measure level, at the dotted half note level, and every measure you change your pitch. Here's a reminder of what that sounds like. So practice that a couple of times. Iron out any of the wrinkles, figure out what's holding your back if you're tripping on anything, and isolate that technique thing and really work on that. Try to figure it out. Is it a bow thing? Is it a left hand thing? Do you have to go a little bit slower simply to coordinate those things? It's okay to hit the pause and play button with your own physical coordinating to try and get all those actions to line up right. So work on that and smooth it out. Then on the next practice session of the week, you can step to the next part of the progression where every dotted quarter note we're changing a note of the scale, so that every time you change your bow direction, you're changing a note of the scale. Here's a reminder of what that sounds like. So go all the way up and down the scale, spend your time working on that, and make sure that gets smoothed out, and work out any kinks that you have on that one. And that's practice session number 2. Practice session number 3, warm up by doing the most difficult one. You've built up to it over the course of the week, and that's where every rhythm that we're articulating in the bow gets a new note of the scale, and it goes like this. And you can see it goes very, very fast. I'm already to the top of the scale. And that one is the hardest one. Go slow on this one. Make sure that you can coordinate the hooked bows against the scale notes. And if you can coordinate it at that tempo, try to go a little bit faster, a little bit faster, a little bit faster until you're up closer to the tempo that you did the other versions of the scale throughout the week. See if you can at least level that tempo up to where the other scale variations were. And it keeps it even across that whole week, across all the different techniques. For this version specifically, you are going to have to lead with the bow. Focus your attention to getting the hooked bow pattern correct. Don't worry as much about the left hand. In fact, if you make note mistakes in the left hand, that's okay. Don't worry about it. What you're focusing on is all of these string crossings and note changes, and coordinating that and staying on bow, down, on, up, down, on, up with your scale. And then after you get this part locked in with the hooked bows, you can focus on correcting the left hand notes. So you have to switch it around. A lot of people lead with their left hand and the bow follows, but in this case we have to switch it around. We have to lead with the bow and then sync the left hand up to ride on top of what the bow is doing. It's a little bit less intuitive, but it's very helpful to play this way, and you're going to need it for a lot more complicated pieces down the road. And then on the 4th session, what you can do is to play all of these 3 versions of the scale back to back to back. You had one session for each of them to coordinate them and work out the kinks on each of them individually. Now play them all back to back. start from the slowest harmonic progression rhythm and move to the quicker. For instance, you would start back here. So our harmonic progression rhythmic is a dotted half note. Then do the dotted quarter note version. Then do the quarter eighth level. So underneath the hooked bow, where we're articulating the different rhythms, every one of those rhythms gets a pitch. And see how it's going. Can you play all of them at the same tempo or not? And that's the fourth session. We also have this bonus pattern. Which you can throw into the mix as it's part of the routine, as part of the cycle, or as like a separate one that you can warm up with if you don't want to be going through this whole progression throughout the week. You just want something quick to warm up with. You can toss that one in. That's kind of a bonus one. You can use it however you need to, whether it's in the context of this hooked bow progression, or if it's just a separate little warm up that you do to get going. After you've gone through this kind of structure and you've put it all together and you can play them all back to back successfully, then you start the cycle all over again. And the next week or the next practice session, you start over, but you take everything up in tempo. And you kind of go through that whole cycle again and take it up in tempo. And maybe at this point, you might not even need to spend an entire session on each individual scale variation. Maybe you can just run all of them back to back to back at higher tempo, and then your focus from session to session is, can I bump it up? Can I bump it up in tempo a little faster each session? And that could be your week's progression. But this gives you a little bit of structure throughout the week when you're practicing for what are you practicing, how are you attacking the key of this piece. We want to have a lot of tools in the practice room for this piece because it's a new bow pattern, hooked bows, and it's new extended playing position. Whether you're doing Farmer in the Dell, D major down here, or Row Your Boat, where we bump that fingering up a string for A major, either way, it's a lot of extension and it's a lot of hooked bows. So I want to give you some extra tools and approaches for how to attack these pieces in the practice room. Don't just play through the piece over and over and over again. That's how you will form some bad habits. I'd rather have you spend the majority of your time working on the scales, working on the bow patterns and coordinating that stuff, and then play through the piece. Maybe you play through the piece at the very beginning, work on your scales, play it again at the end. Notice if there's been an improvement from the first time you played it to the last time that you play it. Or you work on all this warm-up stuff first, and then play through the piece 1, 2, or even 3 times, depending on how you're feeling that day and how much time you have and what you're focusing on. And then if you get through these progressions, maybe you can start to work on spots in the piece. And that's a whole separate conversation for another video. But anyway, I hope this was helpful and gives you a lot of tools for the practice room and also a structure for the whole week of a progression that you can practice through. Okay, enjoy.